Well, I expect more people will join as I give my introduction, but so that we have plenty of time for a discussion after Emily's talk, I think we'll go ahead and get started, and folks can continue joining as I introduce things. Welcome to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems Spring Speaker Series. My name is Hannah Bartram, and I'm the Education and Public Engagement Coordinator for AIFS. And today we are delighted to welcome Emily Ma, head of Google's Food for Good. Today she will discuss Google Food, moonshots, and technology's role in food sustainability. Before I introduce Emily, let me give a quick introduction to the AI Institute for Next Generation Food Systems, also known as AIFS or AIFS. The Institute was established in 2020 under an NSF USDA NIFA grant with the mission of developing and leveraging transformative AI for the ethical production and distribution of safe, sustainable, nutritious food with fewer resources. AIFS is a multidisciplinary collaboration between researchers at 6 different institutions conducting research with a holistic integrated view of the food system. If you would like more information on the research and engagement activities of AIFS, please visit our website and connect with us on social media. Researchers at the Institute are solving challenges in molecular breeding, agricultural production, food processing and distribution, and nutrition, while also focusing on the ethics and socioeconomics of AI in the food system. And our 3 main research focuses are food system and supply chain resiliency, AI infrastructure development for food systems, and AI-driven food systems to improve human health. Our speaker series features thought leaders addressing food system challenges using artificial intelligence. This spring series is themed around AI opportunities in food waste reduction, and our next speaker will be Scott Forsberg, COO of Whole Vine Products, and that will be next Wednesday. We will discuss Chardonnay wine grapes as a new model for upcycling byproducts into value-added finished products and how AI can contribute. And all of our speaker series talks are posted on our YouTube channel if you would like to visit any recordings after the fact. And so with that, I am delighted to be introducing Emily Ma. Emily leads a cross-functional team at Google with the mission of organizing the world's food information in service of building a future food system that is sustainable, nourishing, and equitable for all. Her work on food systems started at X, Alphabet's Moonshot Factory. There, she led a number of early-stage moonshots before working on food systems moonshots inspired by the Google Food team, focusing on reducing food waste and food insecurity and increasing data openness in the food system. Prior to this, Emily helped bring a range of breakthrough technologies into the world, including Loon Internet balloons and glass smart glasses. Emily started her career as a mechanical engineer at IDEO, a global design and innovation consultancy, during which she came to embrace the equal importance of human-centered design, engineering, and business. With this, she returned to Stanford University to pursue her MBA and continues to actively teach entrepreneurship at the School of Engineering. She is the holder of 7 patents spanning medical devices to consumer electronics. And today's discussion will be moderated by Harold Schmitz, co-founder and general partner of March Capital US LLC and a senior scholar in the Graduate School of Management at UC Davis. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emily, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. Give me one moment to share my screen. All right. Does it look good? Can you see my screen?
Looks great.
Well, thank you to all of you today for so generous in your welcome. I wanted to take about 15 minutes simply to provide some context as to why a tech company like Google would care about waste and hunger in the food system and why we would care about the food system regardless. So it actually starts with an origin story. If you can believe it, we hired our first chef before we hired our first HR person. When our founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, were building the company, food was very important to the culture of the organization. And they inherently understood the value of bringing people together to break bread. Sometimes we just become more creative people when we can sit and eat a meal together. Sometimes we're better teammates to our colleagues when we get to learn about each other's lives. And so there was a deep investment into something called Google Food, which is a workplace services program. And the whole entire goal of this program is to inspire and enable the Google community to thrive through food choices and experiences. We also actually end up having healthier staff members as a result, because we make it super easy for them to make like the right choices over time. So anyways, it's win-win. A little bit of background about the scale of that program, and this is context. I'm setting context as to why we're pursuing these food moonshots, so to speak. It's a mid-sized food service company at scale within the Google larger internal operations. So feeding about over 200,000 people a day. We serve breakfast and lunch, and so it's a significant amount of food we're moving around. We work with 59 food service partners. So these are companies like Sodexo, Compass Group, Aramark, etc. And there are literally 12,000 people who help us, bring in the food, process it, cook it, and then serve it. And then, I really meant it when I said a mid-sized food service company. It's like kind of like the Hard Rock Cafe globally. So it's 1,900 spaces, from little cafes to snack kitchens to full-blown cafes to food trucks. And then finally, we are a global platform operating in 60 countries. So again, lots of complexity involved with that system. But if I step away for a second, we have a bigger goal. And as a sort of an organization that is operating at scale like that, we're also part of a really amazing technology company. And Google's mission is to organize the world's food information and make it universally accessible and useful. And if you kind of streamline that, it really comes down to how can we be a more helpful Google? So we asked ourselves, if our team could contribute in some small way to enabling the planet to feed or nourish 10 billion people by 2050, like what would that look like? What would that food system look like that we would want to contribute to, whether it's through our procurement dollars or by sharing best practices, et cetera, et cetera. So I started my career, as Hannah mentioned, in a different part of the organization. Sergey Brin, in about 2008, 2009, decided that he really wanted to think about what was possible with long-term patient capital and deep breakthrough innovation. He set up an organization called X. It was formerly known as Google X, and it was really inspired by the space race. So in the early 60s, many of you will be familiar with this comment, right? JFK did that famous speech. He said, we do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard, because the goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies. And so for those of you who don't recognize this photo, it is the first step of the man on the moon, right? Didn't know how to get there, did not even know how to get out of Earth's orbit at that point. But, early 60s, there was a lot of energy around that vision, a lot of effort, and it didn't look like they were getting anywhere until probably 1967, and then successfully landed on the moon within a 10-year period. So we underestimate how much we can accomplish in the long term, and sometimes overestimate what we can do in the short term. And to think 10 years out, 20 years out, what we can do is really powerful. So that's kind of the origin story of X. That point, Google Food was also inspired by the Moonshot Factory doing its work and said, you know what, we're going to come up, given our aspiration, some of the food shots. And Google's a very, very porous kind of organization. So people from all around the company not only would come and eat breakfast and lunch, they would also ask the chefs in the kitchen, hey, what do you think about this? Like, what if we built an app to do this? What if we reorganized information on Google Maps to help people find restaurants better? Like, what do you think? And so it's a very porous organization where we ask each other for feedback all the time. And at one point, the Google Food team came together and said, you know what? We're getting a lot of requests from product teams about what we might focus on if we could do something in the food system. So they came up with 5 big themes. Number one is how might Google enable choice for everyone? Each of us has a different, sort of physical makeup, different biology, chemistry. What can each of us do to really understand ourselves, and how can Google provide information and enable us to make the right choices around the foods that we eat? Second one, tied to climate. We know that if we project out to 10 billion people and we continue the food system as is, we cannot sustain the amount of animal protein production. So how can we encourage the shift of diets towards, being a little bit more balanced with plant and animal proteins? The third one is enhancing transparency. This one I got very excited about. Turns out there's a lot of challenges in the food system because there's not a ton of transparency. When I mean transparency, it's not data being made public. It's literally like, I have heard of, so I spent a lot of time in food security work with large hunger relief organizations. And there are parts of rural America where you won't get a cell phone signal for 2 to 3 hours. So if you're a truck driver with, let's say, 30,000 pounds of food for rural families in Wyoming, and your truck goes down and you're trying to refrigerate that food, you got no way to like actually put a flare out into the world and let people know that you need help. And so how can we increase the connectivity so that there's more information flowing so that people can make better decisions along the way? The fourth one is tied to enhancing transparency. So I realized that actually a lot of waste occurs from farm to fork because there's not enough information along the way. So I'll give you an example of that a little later, and we'll dig into this one because I spent a lot of time on reducing food waste. And then finally, this concept of circularity. So how do we close the loop? How do we send less things to landfill? How do we send more things, back to the land? And how do we just ensure that we live as a more sustainable species? So those are the 5 food shots. So to back up a little bit even further, I was really, really just inspired by these 5 food shots, but I was in the process of doing this other stuff, right? So all the projects that you see on the screen, I've worked on in some fashion. So on the far left, you see the Waymo Firefly. This was our very first prototype self-driving car. I did a lot of really amazing testing there. I didn't do it myself, but the algorithms and the computer vision systems and the sensors need to work together to ensure that if somebody was walking across the road, we could stop, right? We could understand that scene and stop, right? The second one is called an energy kite. That was a company called Makani. How do we go and capture the wind resource in the world, right? There's actually plenty of wind energy, just in places where you can't put, a 10,000 pound, steel tower to reach the wind. So more on that project separately if you're ever interested. The third one ties back to the question I had around rural connectivity. So this is a project called Tara, and it is using free space optical communications to connect towns that are between 5 to 10 miles apart with nothing more than their shoebox on top of a roof. And the final one, this is how I came to Google Glass. We're not doing smart eyewear anymore at Google, but it is now a $10 billion industry, and it's used a lot in enterprise businesses from Boeing to, sort of pick and pack out organizations and to medical. So anyways, that's kind of the context from which I come from. So when the Google food team, right, this is the team that produces 300,000 meals a day, came to us and said, hey, we got all this data and it's all image data. We were like, you got a what, right? And so what you see here on this poster is basically a mosaic of images just from the cafe I go to every lunchtime, right? So every day, the chefs at the end of the day will take a picture of what they're about to compost, or the trim waste that they generated, meaning, when you're peeling carrots and when you're chopping off the ends of asparagus, you're supposed to snap them, but I'm not the best chef. They were collecting all these images through a system called LeanPath, and they basically came to all of us machine learning engineers and said, hey, is there something you can do with this that would be interesting? We're like, wow, this is cool, right? So for those of you who are in AI or ML, it's like magic to actually have access to well-tagged image data. Suffice it to say, when we dug in a little bit, this image data wasn't as clean and accurate and well tagged as we would like in order to segment and then run classification algorithms on top of. So we built our own system. I'm not going to dig into this, but it turns out that it is actually very feasible to determine what class and what category of product is going to our compost bins. We also realized that we actually had to take short videos instead of take pictures, because sometimes people pile a lot, like operationally, chefs are going to pile on a bunch of foods into a bin. So you want to capture multiple shots as they're pouring it into the compost bin, for example. We also did a lot of work over the years as we dug into the space in 2018, 2019 on hyperspectral imaging. And this one is particularly exciting for me because we were able to image literally thousands of strawberries and be able to understand if there was a defect that would cause decay or molding or whatnot before a really good inspector could. And if I had one hope, is to see hyperspectral imagery become a lot cheaper over time. So more on that separately as well. But at the end of the day, what happened in 2020? All of us remember what happened in 2020. This happened. It was mind-blowing to watch the food system, which was very efficient, highly optimized to drive great volumes to many, many people, crack, right? On one hand, we were watching farmers till and disc food back into the ground. On the other hand, in grocery stores, we were seeing empty shelves. And long story short, I realized something really important as a technologist, as an engineer. I realized, just as Jonathan Foley from the Drawdown Project said, we need now, not new. So in order to achieve our 2030 goals for sustainable development, in order to really do the right thing for climate, in order to really support society, we need a portfolio of solutions. So a lot of the breakthrough technologies we're working on, let's keep working on those. But at the same time, if it means that I have a conversation with 1,000 chefs to understand what their experience has been around food security, and that causes them to be more intentional about trimming appropriately or not serving the extra spoon when I don't ask for it, like that's a perfectly fine solution too. It doesn't involve AI, but it works, right? So we need now, not new. I would say, I would amend that to we need now and new, but I would put that forth to all of you as you think about your role as AI experts. So in the last 2.5 years or so, we expanded out from really focusing on technology and data efforts to also doing policy work. So alongside a number of other organizations like the Harvard Food Policy Clinic, WWF, ReFed, we really encouraged the Build Back Better plan to include composting infrastructure for cities. I was incredibly proud to kickstart an effort around a $20 million catalytic grant fund with ReFed, with Kroger and other organizations, so that we can catalyze solutions needed to recover more food and reduce less food waste, or reduce food waste in general. And then finally, on the right, Google really did step up. So in 2021, our chief business officer stepped up. We did a lot of work cleaning up Google Maps so that anyone searching for find free food would get an accurate result, or 3 results at minimum, within a 15-minute walk of their house. In 2022, our CEO Sundar Pichai announced a $10 million cash grant, $10 million ads grant to Feeding America, and it was really focused on the most rural, most in-need food banks that needed technical infrastructure to serve the tens of millions of people that they're serving right now. And so we've really expanded out. So from tech and data to also policy making to capital drivers. And then at the same time, this one is probably the one that I'm most proud of. It took a lot of effort to do this, because an organization of Google's scale making a public goal requires a significant amount of analysis, of strategy, of intention setting. And after about 1.5 years of work, again, remember we operate in 60 countries with a staff of 12,000 chefs, right? And serving 300,000 meals a day, we were able to come to the conclusion that we were within reach if we were to set a 2025 goal of reducing food waste by 50% per Googler, and then diverting all of that food waste from landfill. And the reason why we want to divert all the food waste from landfill is because the methane footprint of organics landing in landfill is extremely high. And so for climate reasons, we want none of it to go to landfill. So I'll leave you with one thing. We think about our impact on the world through this sort of process, right? And I know all of you are incredibly smart, have a lot of sort of audacious goals. As we've sort of navigated this complex system, we realized we had to do these 4 things. Number 1 is to seed the opportunity. So when we bring together an ecosystem of folks, how do we really get clear of the opportunity? Second one is, how do we envision the future state, right? Like JFK with a man on the moon, right? How do we enable an ecosystem of partners? And what I mean by that, it's academia, it's industry, it's public sector, it's nonprofit. And then how do we actually keep each other sort of going as we discover new things along the way and then deliver on our promises, right? Food waste is a massive contributor to climate. The World Food Program notes that if it were a country, it would be 3rd in line for emissions globally, right? After China and United States. And so, I think collectively, I have so many friends now in this space at Google and outside of Google who are all working in their own way from where they sit towards delivering on our 2030 goals for the US and beyond. And so thank you for caring about this topic. Really thrilled to be here. You can always find me online or at emilyma@google.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emily. That was a great overview. There were so many different exciting pieces that I look forward to diving into in dialogue. So I'd encourage all our viewers to ask questions in the chat, but we'll kick things off with Harold Schmitz, who is going to be moderating this dialogue now. And I know that Harold, you have some questions prepared. So as folks are thinking about that and adding to the chat, or you can raise your hand on Zoom as well. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Hannah. So Emily, that was an awesome presentation. I was sitting there going, this is the textbook zoom in, zoom out construct. I mean, you did some major zooming out, and I really like the zoom in part about, as a company and the human beings that are in the company, how do you zoom in and do stuff? And, which is really, really cool. So really appreciate that. I do have a bunch of questions, and so I'm going to ask a few here, and then as questions come in from the audience. But first question is, we had our previous session for this series was with a company called Evergreen. They're a group that you're familiar with. They're a wholly owned subsidiary of AB InBev, and they're focused on upcycling. And they actually, they fit in, I guess, the shifting the diets piece potentially a little bit with what they do. But given you have some familiarity with Evergreen, and given AIFS heard from them during the first session here about their views on AI, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how could you see Google interacting with a company like Evergreen, and would love to hear some specific thoughts if you have any on like AI technology specifically, but in general, if you could talk about how Google might interact with Evergreen, that would be great.
Sure. So let me start in general. Really glad all of you had a chance to learn a little bit more about Evergreen. I've been sort of tracking them ever since they got going. The food system produces an enormous amount of byproduct, and there's opportunity for that byproduct. There's that saying, right? Like, one man's like waste is another man's or woman's, like gift, right? So for me, spent grain. I mean, we need a lot of grain to like make beer. I like beer too. So, I drink a lot of beer, and, I know there's byproduct associated with it. To date, we've not done necessarily anything AI specific in this space, but what we have gotten really, really thoughtful about is, and I don't know if they talked about the upcycled Foods Association and the work around that. So highly recommend you take a look at UFA. It was started a couple of years ago. I think it has 400 members. But at the end of the day, the Evergreen's work is a really good example of upcycled foods. We put as I mentioned earlier, $1 million anchor grant into ReFed's broader catalytic grant fund, of which a portion has gone to the Upcycled Foods Association, because at the end of the day, you can take something like spent grain and turn it into something else, right? Whether it's animal feed, whether it's, you can break it down for other sort of products or ingredients to other products. You can make more of that rather than sending it to compost or landfill. So the question in mind is, what can we do with even the byproducts of our food system that are the highest and best use of that resource? And so that's number one. We are also not only granting money through the catalytic grant fund, we are also starting to purchase more upcycled foods for our own system. So again, imagine the amount of food that we need to produce 300,000 meals a day. So the average weight per meal is about 1.2. And so we're buying a lot of food. And if we can buy more upcycled foods, that makes a difference. That encourages the industry to shift. And so two really good examples of this. Number one, there's a company called Matriarch Foods. Remember I talked about trimmings, right? When you get a bag of carrots from the grocery store, and I know a lot of folks like to purchase like little baby carrots for their kids as snacks, right? That's already a really good example of an upcycled food, by the way. Most of those baby carrots come from carrots that didn't meet grade, right? So they're turning it into products that look more consistent and then creating a snack out of it. But there's also trim, right? They had to trim all of the sort of peel of the skin of the carrot off. We can take all of that trim, all of the stems of like the asparagus and broccoli and whatnot. We can create broth. And so that's what Matriarch Foods does, is it literally purchases at a great discount all of the trim waste from other processors and creates a very high quality vegetable broth that becomes the base for soups and sauces and whatnot for Google. So that's a good example. Another one is called Renewal Mill, right? They take things like, this is not a perfect example, but I don't know if you're all familiar with how coffee is grown. So coffee is actually a coffee cherry, and what we are grinding and then making coffee out of every morning is the seed. And the coffee cherry itself oftentimes is just discarded, right? And we can take that coffee cherry actually and dry it out and turn into flour and use that instead of regular flour. And that actually is a substitute that tastes great, especially for brownies and things like that. So there's many, many more examples. Renewal Mill is really built their brand around things like alternative flours that are leveraging sort of byproducts of the system. So in terms of AI, though, like one of the things that I think would be really exciting over time, and I don't think we have anything active in this space with respect to upcycled foods, but when we have ingredients that are coming out of byproducts, how can we leverage AI, this is just general, to accelerate our ability to be creative? And so, my story around AI has always gone back to some of the work that we've done with DeepMind, right? This is a part of Google. We did like AlphaGo, how do we, create somebody who can play the game of Go, but also just much more sort of, in my mind, impactful. Not that AlphaGo isn't impactful. I think it's fascinating watching ourselves play games. But there's something called AlphaFold, right? And so manually, if you were to go about trying to understand the structure of protein, a PhD student can only do that so quickly with existing tools. It's a three-dimensional shape. It's difficult to discern what that is. We can use artificial intelligence to predict the 3D structure of proteins. And there's just 100 million proteins that exist. And then if you know the base structure, you can start to combine different characteristics of different proteins together to literally invent new foods, right? And you can give it the characteristics that you're looking for, and then you can invent new foods, and you can explore the solution space much more quickly. And then some subset we can go and maybe create the prototype for it and see what it's like. So I'm excited to see what's possible with the upcycled foods, not necessarily the final product, but like look at all the ingredients. We can break them down to the component parts, whether they're fats, proteins, et cetera, and then recombine them using AI to see what we can get.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And actually, for the first part of your answer, there's a question that came in from Gail Taylor that I'll get to in a minute. That last part. So we had a group called Notco come in last year, and so obviously they're sort of, I think they're interested along with other AI companies in sort of pursuing what you just said, but it requires investments like what you guys did with DeepMind to really do that properly and stuff. So anyway, that's really cool. Thanks for bringing that up. Just sort of to build on this evergreen piece, and this might build into Gail's question, which I'll recite in a minute. But do you have an example that you can talk about? I realize there's proprietary client relationships, but do you have an example you could talk about your favorite interaction between Google and a company in the food sector space? Could be retail, could be manufacturer, could be whoever. But could you talk about one of those?
Absolutely. So this one's public for sure. We wrote a number of blogs about it. Big picture, and I give Kroger a significant amount of credit because they really helped us with so many things. They helped us actually establish Google's global food waste goals, because that takes courage. That takes executive courage to go out there and commit publicly, because the public is going to hold us accountable now. And Kroger actually established zero waste, zero hunger goals back in 2017. And they coached us along the way to set those goals. We became very good friends. And over time, I had mentioned earlier, what does it mean to build an ecosystem that's multi-sectoral, meaning it involves industry, it involves nonprofit, it involves academia, it involves nonprofits. And so Kroger and Feeding America and Google came together, and we sat down, we're like, well, seems like we all have maybe a piece of the puzzle. And what are the conditions that would allow us to work together freely? And even if we're maybe doing it under the radar as a starting point to sort of create the prototype, what can we do and how can we do it anyways? And so knowing that Kroger had already set public goals around zero hunger, zero waste, they're also a founding member of Feeding America, which, by the way, is the largest hunger relief organization in the world, not just the US. They recover 6 billion pounds of food a year right now. So huge impact on the US, by the way, on food waste. This is food that would have otherwise ended up in compost or landfill. They're recovering to feed our neighbors. They're like, well, okay, why don't we just start with this? Again, I had mentioned earlier that the food and ag industry is not necessarily that digitized, but data does exist. And there's a paper, if you want to take a look at it, the reasons why food data is not shared is not necessarily it's a technical challenge, by the way. Most challenges in food and ag are not necessarily technical. They're mainly about trust and relationships and connectivity and things that are very different than what I'm used to. And so we sat around the table and we agreed, right? We agreed, okay, for this period of time, for this, Kroger was very kind and said, we will share with you every evening shrink data. That's basically information about the food that they didn't sell, right? They have 2,800 stores across the country. Feeding America convinced a very small number of their food banks out of their 200 food banks to also step up and share where they were sourcing their food from. So, food leaves a Kroger store and then ends up at a food bank. And then when it leaves the store, they check it out, right? They're scanning it. And when it arrives at a food bank, they're scanning it, right? So we were able to be sort of the neutral data group in between. We have no agenda here. We're not a food company. We're not a food bank. And we were able to sit in the middle and be sort of the steward of that information, and to also take a look at the information and the interconnects and whatnot, and to analyze it just kind of freely and creatively. At the end of the day, it turns out that there's some significant opportunities to basically help Kroger donate more of its food to its community, right? Its staff members, 500,000 of them, really appreciate it when they know the impact that they've made on the community, right? So closing that loop there in terms of information. So, if I'm a produce associate working on the floor, culling the fruits and vegetables every night, it's nice to know that my work actually fed 30 families in my neighborhood. And then Feeding America on the back end really appreciated having some sense of what might be coming down the pipeline so that they can get organized and figure out where to plug in holes, right? Because you can't just feed people with onions, right? You can't give somebody 20 pounds of onions for a week, right? You need to have a mix of, fruits, vegetables, and other foods. And then even beyond that, right? for each organization on its own, they were able to streamline and be better with what resources they had. So on the Feeding America side, while we only had a very small number of participants in the first round, we were able to show that it was possible for food banks to do collective buying, which they weren't necessarily doing, right? So you might have 5 food banks all buying from the same citrus grower in Florida, but they don't know that, right? Because Feeding America is not like a franchise organization. It's a network administrative organization, right? Which is very different than a top-down approach. We were able to show that with collective buying, everybody saves and everybody wins. And now I believe some 4 or 5 dozen food banks in the network share their data with each other through the national office. And so this is not necessarily AI, but again, I want to go back to the foundation of AI. If you want to read a great paper that we put together in 2019, I will link it here for you in the chat window. We talk about how the first step to getting to great AI efforts involves just getting our data house in order, right? And so we've been investing in getting the data house in order for others. And sometimes it's not publicly available. Sometimes we have to basically create the conditions where there's a data sharing agreement for a set period of time, for a set number of people to explore the data, and then we release it once we're done, right?
That's all. Thank you. That was a lot, but that was really, really helpful because it was a really specific example. And actually, there's a project within AIFS, the portfolio projects that is interacting with food banks and a local food bank here. And so, and as you were going through that, there's some people within AIFS that actually directly are interested in what you just said. Amazing. For a local reason. So the zoom in. So that was that couldn't have been better. Thank you for that. So there's a question from Ron Margolis, and so I was going to read Gail's question, but she just sent a note about 5 minutes ago saying she had to leave. So Gail's a plant science professor. So I'm going to skip over Gail's question and go to Ron. So the question is, do you have any advice for those looking to transition from food processing operations into outreach and research? And are there any, fellowship grant opportunities that enable those in the food system trenches to help make an impact on developing intelligent integrated systems? So, for example, implementing data acquisition in the processing and packaging of foods to determine waste and quality. And I think this is kind of where you were going, with it at the end of your answer. But if you could elaborate on that, it'd be great.
Well, let me share a link. I've shared a bunch of links in the chat window, so if you need it, I'll be typing into the chat window for all of us. It is refed.com and refed.org. It's actually an org. So I mentioned earlier, just very quickly, this organization that really looks at, it's US based, and it gets offers from all over the world to bring their model over to other countries. But they are a data-driven nonprofit that really aggregates information across the United States around how we're doing towards our 2030 Sustainable Development Goal of reducing food waste by 50%. And it's really the big tent for all of the solutions providers. So I bring them up because they have a great summit coming up. So I believe summit.refed.org. I'll be in St. Louis with Evergreen and lots of other friends who are in the space who care about food waste, food surplus, all of these topics. And I bring them up also because they have a partnership with the Environmental Defense Fund. If you look up ReFed and EDF, they have a fellowship every year now where 12 folks can, from industry, from academia, can basically spend, I think it's 3 to 6 months with ReFed and EDF to work on a project of some sort, right? So data acquisition in the processing and packaging of foods could be one of those projects. And so they're about to launch their new cohort this year, so maybe not 2023, but 2024, definitely look into that. That's kind of the first thing that comes to mind. ReFed in general, I would encourage you to go to the website because, and check out their summit, because if I sit on their board, I might not know of opportunities in outreach and research, but they will definitely know. If you missed their summit from the 16th to 18th of May, I believe they have either monthly or quarterly calls that you could join and ask this question. And it is really just a phenomenal community. Almost everything I've learned along the way has been through some connection I've made through ReFed over the years.
Very cool. So just sort of also building on the specificity and actually the group that's assembled here. So, and this is the dream project question, which is, given what you've seen and learned from your side of the table over the years, and the organizations like you just mentioned, and getting to know them and what they're good at and whatnot. And if you were going to lay out a dream project between a federal organization, so let's choose USDA since they're a funder of AIFS, it turns out. So USDA, and then UC, just pick UC Davis since we're sitting here in Davis, but there's 3 other universities that are part of, part of AIFS, so Berkeley and Cornell and Illinois, but any one of those universities. And then Google, what would be a dream project going forward between, USDA, Google, and UC Davis?
Maybe I could start with an example of a great project, like a model inspirational project. Context first. USDA, government entity, UC Davis, and AIFS's sort of partners, all in academia, and then Google, right? We're all sort of, Google is a for-profit public company that is beholden to our shareholders. So we all are motivated by different things. Government, their goal is to deploy taxpayers' money to really for the benefit of society, civilians, et cetera. Academia, for the most part, you have a mandate to find novel research to do and publish papers in, academically reviewed journals, right? And then finally, Google has to make money. I don't know how else to put it, right? So let's just put it that way. And so, we just remind ourselves that each of us come from a different sort of incentive space. So the project that I always think of and I look to is some of the work that my colleague, Rebecca Moore, over at Google Maps has been stewarding for 15 some years. And under her sort of watch, we created things like the Global Fishing Watch Project, the Global Forest Watch Project, the Global Power Watch Project. And I think the Global Forest Watch Project is a really good example of that, of an academic, private, public partnership. So imagine if you could determine deforestation in real time, right? Ag is a huge contributor to deforestation, by the way. 5 years ago, that was, even 10 years ago, that was really hard to do. And there were researchers who were trying to pull together all the satellite imagery that's freely available from NASA, basically stitching it all together, removing the clouds, right? It's like 10 different steps before you can have a map of a snapshot of what the world looks like today. And then you got to overlay that and look at the differential with the map of the world from yesterday, right? That requires an enormous amount of compute. So the researcher we were working with, he literally could only run the model like, I don't know, once every 2 weeks, once maybe a month, right? Because it just required that much compute. And when Rebecca's team started working with this research team, we were able to do it in like, I don't know, you put 15,000 computers on it, right? Suddenly it becomes a much easier problem. And so now Global Forest Watch is hosted by the World Resources Institute. Google continues to provide the compute right behind the scenes. And researchers are able to really look in real time what's happening in deforestation, like close to real time, meaning like every day it gets updated, right? And then you can zoom all the way in, zoom all the way out, pull the metadata out of it and really look at what's happening. And so when I think about a project that we could do together, let's say USDA with as a government entity, UC Davis and AIFS's sort of cohort, and then Google. I would love to find a way to dig into like food information that maybe the USDA encourages entities to publicly share their data, and then UC Davis and your students and your researchers can do the research, and then we can provide the technology platform, whether that's BigQuery or Analytics Hub or whatever else we can provide freely so that we can all come together. I come from the food waste world, so I'm particularly biased. So if it could be a project around food waste, and given like 1383, AB 1383 was a new regulation in California around food waste in commercial and eventually residential. You can't just throw it out anymore in your regular trash can. I don't know who else we need to bring along to find that information. It might be the waste management companies or whatnot. I think that would be a fascinating picture we can share with the world. And at the end of the day, I'm also a huge proponent of open sourcing everything, because I really truly believe that there's some things that we should keep closed source, but in as much as possible, when it's climate related, when it's social impact related, if we can open source it, we can bring many more people along. I can talk about data licensees all day long, by the way. For those of you who don't know, the internet was basically built on open source. So I'm a huge proponent. Google exists because of permissive licensing of open source technology in the world.
So that's really, and that is definitely a topic of conversation with this group. So need to invite you back for just that topic, actually. So building on this question, actually, not the licensing question, but the sort of dream project. Here's a question from Tim Wimay, and Tim is a co-founder actually of a local company in Davis called Engage3, and they're a data analytics company that looks at the consumer sort of retail world. The question is, Emily, are you aware of any efforts to leverage the world's food information to make it easier for people to find, choose, and purchase retail food options that align with their health situation? So clearly this is in the shifting diet sort of scope that you laid out during your presentation. So anyway, over to you.
Yeah, there's a number of them out there. I don't know of ones that are specifically like tying shifting diets to enabling choice yet, but the one that immediately comes to mind is an organization called How Good. They've been working with a lot of CPG companies, food companies, to really categorize and organize information about the origin of the food, the sort of climate footprint of the food, the nutritional profile of the food. It's a really tricky thing to do, and they, in the past 5-10 years, have gained a lot of momentum. A lot of organizations in this space, right? And I actually believe the data is already available. It's just, somebody's got to go and scan it in, right? In some weird way, it reminds me of like the book project that Google had about 20 years ago. We thought we could scan every library book in the world and working with publishers, enable at least a glimpse into every book, right? So the food information, I believe, is there. Like if it's a packaged good, I think it's way easier. But even produce items, again, we can get very, very gnarly into, the differences of an apple that was grown today versus an apple that was grown 50 years from now. I don't know if you can just scan it, because the nutritional profile of an apple really requires, I think, some work directly on that item. And then it's hard to tell where a produce item came from, right? I hate labels, I hate boxes, I hate plastic, but sometimes it's very useful when it comes to getting information out of something. So maybe another dream project is how can we create, then there's lots of sensors out there. I know there's lots of folks working on sensors that allow us to more automatically determine the bricks profile, so the sugar profile of a food item, other things about a food item. But that world is still trying to find its, how do I say it, killer app, right? At the end of the day, for something to scale and be adopted widely and used widely, we need to find the economic reason for it to be that way. And so, I would love nothing more than to find the sort of business model that would make sensors like that more available everywhere.
All right, so we've got 2 grant proposals already from your from this talk, so that's really good. So from a talent perspective, and this is really important too, because obviously we've got faculty, staff, students that are that are part of this whole thing, AIFS. so you've, in your experience, could you construct either, one ideal sort of talent profile for who you'd want to see come into Google, or
Yeah,
five different or whatever, but could you just talk talent and what you hope to see going forward?
for sure. And thank you so much for all of you also helping with our pipeline of incredible talent and in general into the space. So, I've worked in various parts of the organization and worked with various parts of the organization. So let's start with the ideal profile of somebody for Google Research and Google Accelerated Sciences, and then Google X, or X the Moonshot Factory. We are looking for hybrid thinkers, right? So, I love the fact that, there are folks out there who are deeply, deeply into foundational AI, right? Like actually most of the folks that we have are working out of DeepMind, right? Just foundational elements of how do you build, a general AI, et cetera, right? The talent pool that I'm most excited about when it comes to solving the world's hardest problems, as I mentioned, are the hybrids, right? So are you an machine learning engineer or a data scientist or an artificial intelligence expert who's also willing to jump in the dumpster with me and sort through trash? When I hired my tech leads for this work, I literally take them with me into a composting facility, or like we will do a trash audit of our building together, or we will go in the kitchen together. And actually, even once, one of my longtime favorite tech leads was on a fishing boat with me in southern Japan at like 3 a.m, trying to make our hardware work, right? So it's really important to not only have that depth in technology and AI and ML, but to also have breadth, right? Also to be a humanist, right? Like care about the challenge that we're solving for. Want to be out there to meet with the people who will be impacted by the work we're developing and putting out in the world. At the end of the day, each of us and the work that we do, when it's successful, will affect a lot of people's lives. And so even for my tech lead out in a fishing boat at 3 a.m, it really gave him context of, wow, actually there's many, many smallholder farmers and fishermen who literally get up at 3 a.m. every day and do their fishing from 4 to 5 a.m., right? And this is what their lives are like. So, right, I got to figure out this algorithm to figure out where we're at in the world to combine like satellite, signal and, Wi-Fi signal and cell signal, whatever we can get. But, okay, like this information is going to be important to this person, and this is the way it needs to be presented and why, right? So long story short, I know that it's easy to sit in front of our computers. It's easy to run our sort of algorithms day to day and keep fine tuning them. It's just as important to make sure that we go out into the world and get context.
Very cool. That was a great, that should be like an advertising soundbite for the land grant university system, right?
Yes.
There, which is really, really interesting.
Yes, and we're lucky in California to have the land grant system,
yes.
right?
Yep.
You see, like you're phenomenally fortunate to have access to like the ag land that you have to go and do research on.
Exactly right. It's amazing. So we have time for one more question, which let's see. I don't think one popped up here, so I'm going to ask this last question. Oh, hold on. There is Ron just put in another question, so I've got to defer to him. That piggybacking off the talent comment, what I was trying to get at with my last question is that it's also confusing. 99% of these opportunities are limited to graduate students, those who have chosen to pursue traditional collegiate education. There's a massive skill gap in manufacturing and processing talent at the ground level. What is Google doing, or can they do to scale apprenticeship or training programs? So he's coming at you again on that. And I'm reading these aloud so we have them on the record. I know you can say it as well.
I appreciate it. So again, Ren, thank you so much for the question. I'm going to try to interpret what you're saying. Again, just a reminder, Google is not a food company. We are a tech company. So we have deep interest in food and ag because so many of let me go back to why we're interested in food and ag as sort of closing the loop. Turns out that a very large portion of searches on Google Maps, Google search, and YouTube have something to do with food, right? Like whether you're typing in, give me a chicken recipe that helps me figure out what my leftovers are, to like, find a restaurant near me, right? Secondarily, some of our biggest customers are in food and ag. So Kroger, I had mentioned earlier, also a very big customer, for cloud and ads. And so over the years, we've developed an understanding of the food and ag system collectively because we're in service of our customers and billions of users who keep entering like search queries, asking us to connect them with information about food and ag. Coming down to your massive skills gap question around manufacturing and processing, we work with manufacturing companies and we work with processing companies, right? And they have needs around, digital infrastructure, communications infrastructure. And we do have a lot of free programs in the world that will help folks who are curious about, AI and data engineering and just basic data skills. And so we have created free tools, whether it's through Coursera or Udacity or just other platforms. And we encourage folks to leverage that. But at the end of the day, I would say the hardest thing about the food industry is like people are so limited on time that they have. And it's such tight margins that to pull somebody off of the manufacturing floor and say, hey, I want you to take an hour every week to really study this sort of slightly arcane topic. That's hard, right? So maybe an aspect to you, Ren, is like, is there a willingness to take some of the generalized content that we have on just AI and data education and make it relevant to manufacturing and processing? I am not a manufacturing and processing person. I've spent enough times in, like processing facilities to have some sense, but at the end of the day, it would be, I would say if the food industry could find ways to step up, whether it's FMI, whether it's NRA, whether it's these organizations, could help figure out what would be relevant, right? Like how could a chef use ChatGPT or Bard to like be more creative with what they cook? How could a food scientist use similar AI tools to accelerate their creativity, right? I don't know, because we don't, again, I know what I know, and I definitely humbly know what I don't know. So I try to be very, very transparent about that.
So, I mean, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah to close it now because we're at the top of the hour, but I just want to say what you just said was really, so I'm a 30-year food industry veteran, mostly in industry, but also, spanning the academic spectrum. And what you just said was really, really insightful. And it's, we need to, with specifics, bring companies like Google and companies from the food industry, could be AB InBev and, Evergreen and, et cetera, and Kroger from the retail, and then really examine the surface, interact, because they're different sectors and they have their peculiarities. And it seems like they can connect together in the way that you just said, but there is a gap, and we've got to study this gap and figure it out. And so I just want to thank you for your presentation and your comments. It's been really inspiring. Really, really appreciate it. So anyway, Hannah, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Harold, for leading that discussion. And thank you so much, Emily, for taking the time to speak with us today and share and discuss. I think I've learned a lot, and I think everyone else here has as well. And thank you for sharing all the resources as well. Sorry that we didn't have time to get to all the questions, but I really appreciate this conversation. And a reminder to everyone that our next speaker series talk will be next Wednesday at the same time, noon Pacific. Scott Forsberg, COO of Whole Vine. So we hope to see you there. Thank you again, Emily.
Thank you so much.